There we go. Good to see you all. Hi, Anna. Anna just joined us just now. Good to see you. Let's begin with our usual repertoire of prayers. Sangye Churang Suki Chognam La Changchu Badu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sognam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create, through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. Sangye Churang Soki Chognam La Changchu Padu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sognam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Sho. So try to actualize that in your mind, thinking that you're taking refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Arya Sangha, the Bodhisattva Arya Sangha, where it says the Sangye Churang Soki Chognam La. Sok means assembly. That's another word. In Sanskrit, that's the usual word for that is Gana. I haven't seen the prayer, this prayer of taking refuge and generating bodhicitta in Sanskrit. Paul, have you seen in Sanskrit by any chance?
Not that immediately comes to mind. No.
Supposedly it was composed by Atisha, but when we say Sangye Churang Soki Chognam La, I think the the sog there, it should be TSOG. It is sort of sog, like when you make sog puja, it refers to the organa chakra, it refers to the assembly. So Soki Chok means the supreme assembly. That means the Arya Bodhisattvas. So try to think that we're relying upon these Mahayana understanding, and particularly the Prasangika point of view, taking refuge, and then the second part, trying to develop the bodhicitta motivation that by listening to the teaching today, I will create the karma and the collection of wisdom and merit to become a Buddha for the sake of liberating them. And then offering the mandala. By offering this ground anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and moon, visualized as a Buddha realm, may all migrators enjoy such a pure realm. And then having offered that as part of the offering, just when you encounter teachers, if you go to a center or something and you meet a Dharma teacher for the first time, oftentimes you try to make offering and then make a request, would you please, if it might be a general request, teach the Dharma in general, or will you give me the oral transmission of this mantra or that mantra? You always precede it with an offering. So that was the offering of the mandala. And then the request, O holy and perfect pure lamas, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay. Good to see you. Paul is here, Mintu's here. So we're going to begin again with a little meditation. Hopefully, by the force of doing this meditation again and again, just like doing yoga, hatha yoga, or practicing your tennis swing or your golf swing, you will develop some facility in it over time. Okay, so relax your body and mind. place your mindfulness on the breathing, the respiration, having first noticed it. And then squeezing attention, keep your mindfulness on that to the exclusion of other multitasking thoughts. And similar to the verse of the 8 verses of training the mind, that goes something like this: vigilant of my mind stream throughout all actions. When afflictions arise, endangering myself and others, I'll confront and avert them without delay. Similar to that, this vigilance, this mental spy, you want to be vigilant now whether your mind is wandering off, it's being scattered onto other thoughts. And if it is, you want to apply the antidote, which was to bring the mind back to the object intended here, which is the respiration. and having little success in a little, not little, but a little success in calming the mind from the continuity of compulsive thoughts that were present before. Turn your attention to the mental consciousness alone. You're watching the mind with the mind. So it's not a matter of autocognition or self-cognition. It's one moment of mind looking at the previous moment of mind. Be aware of what you're thinking, what images are coming, if there's an emotional tone of anger or attachment, angst. Fear about the future, maybe the past, the present. All of this is content within the clear light nature of the mind, which offers no resistance to the emergence of mental objects in order to their reabsorption into the consciousness. If you can get to the point where you can focus on that, that's a great achievement. This is what's called the conventional Buddha nature, conventional clear light nature of the mind. Which allow the developmental Buddha nature, I mean, as a result of this, because there's no resistance to developing material into the mind, we can start to, through familiarity, through meditation, again and again, familiarizing our mind with virtuous states. And by applying various antidotes, eventually the antidote of emptiness, selflessness, we can cause the negative states of mind to decrease and actually be abandoned. That's the state of affairs. That's what we have. That's incredibly beneficial to know and an object of joy, object of rejoicing. Similar to the rejoicing we can have when we recognize that we have this moment of auspiciousness, this auspicious moment of a life of leisure and endowment, perfect human rebirth. More valuable than, world systems full of wish-fulfilling jewels, which at most could bring us material aims in that particular life, but would offer no benefit to future lives. Unlike that, the life of leisure and endowment and this developmental Buddha nature that we can recognize through it allows us to create anything wished for future lives. If we want to be wealthy or attractive or interesting or powerful, have pleasure, we can create those. But as the Buddha advised, the great meaningfulness of a life of leisure and endowment is that we can use it to achieve cessation, liberation from cyclic existence, and more particularly, we can achieve enlightenment, even in this lifetime, in this degenerate age, through the practice of highest yoga tantra. In one lifetime, we can achieve enlightenment, one short lifetime. Why would we want to do that? And go further than just achieving nirvana for ourselves? Because we are intimately related with all sentient beings. We're exactly equal in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. They have all been our intimate friends and mothers in numberless lifetimes and have held us and protected us and educated us, given us pleasures numberless times. Even though the memory of that may be gone, they may appear as strangers or even enemies. In the longer term, longer view of things, we will encounter them again and again while we are in cyclic existence. Our samsaric fellow travelers, and even the enemies will be our dearest friends again in the future. Our present friends may sometimes be strangers or even become enemies. They're all exactly equal in being friend, enemy, and stranger. But in particular, the benefit that they've accrued us, that they've produced for us as friends, as mothers, even as strangers, even as enemies, in helping us to purify negative karma, makes them very dear, very precious, as though something you want to hold carefully, like a precious little canary or a precious little mouse that you've trained in your palms, looking at it, seeing this was my mother numberless times. Now they don't recognize me as their son or daughter. And to ordinary appearance, I don't recognize them as mother. But through the meditation, Mahayana meditation on recalling the Mashe, recognizing all sentient beings. Ma means mother, She means to understand, understanding that all sentient beings have been our mother numberless times. We can develop a closeness, a warmth when we encounter them. I remember Lama Yeshe sometimes when Mami Max, the nun, would sometimes be very argumentative and, sort of become combative or something like that with Lama. I could hear Lama saying, mother sentient beings, Ma Semchen. Even the present enemies have been our mother numberless times. From that warm state of mind, heartwarming love, so to speak, developing then with an understanding of the enormity of the sufferings of cyclic existence, and how even the pleasures, the perfections of cyclic existence bring no satisfaction, how the striving to enjoy them, to have them, is the doorway to all suffering, and how they can't be relied on. They're not something that is stable. Recognizing that in conjunction with the plight of sentient beings, we can develop great compassion for them. And at first, just wish that they'd be free from that. And then, through the sense of responsibility toward them, recognizing that I myself must remove them from suffering, alleviate their suffering, not just their present suffering. If we can, that's good. but their long-term suffering within cyclic existence. In order to do that, we have to be able to teach them the Dharma methods that we already know, to share with them in whatever way we can, in skillful ways, not necessarily in a formal teaching, but just by our own behavior. But in a more deep sense, to really protect all sentient beings and lead them into the state of enlightenment, we ourselves have to become enlightened. So coming to that realization is the development of bodhicitta. I must become enlightened in order to benefit sentient beings. In order to do so, I have to accumulate the two collections of merit and wisdom, which act as the cooperative causes of the development of the form bodies of the enlightened being, our future enlightened being. Merit, and we have to accumulate the collection of wisdom that is a cooperative cause to developing the wisdom body, the omniscient mind, our future omniscient mind. The substantial causes of those are the subtlemost clear light mind and the subtlemost wind that acts as the mount of that subtlemost mind. That's what will actually transform into the form bodies, the wind, prana, and the subtlemost mind is what will transform into the omniscient mind with the aid, with the cooperative causes of the collection of merit and wisdom. So with that aim in mind, knowing that Gompa Rabsel, the commentary about Lama Tsong Khapa on Chandrakirti is a Madhyamakavatara, which in turn is a commentary to Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, teaches especially the collection of wisdom, but incidentally also the collection of merit. I think I'm going to participate today in order to achieve enlightenment, because I already have the subtlemost mind and wind, but I don't yet have the accumulation of merit and wisdom. I'm going to listen in order to accumulate those collections to become Buddha, a Buddha, so that I can effortlessly, without error, spontaneously lead all mother sentient beings out of suffering into the stable happiness of enlightenment, everlasting happiness of enlightenment. Try to develop that altruistic motivation, bodhicitta motivation for listening to the teachings. Okay. Thank you. So, hi, Suvash. Suvash is here also. You see Mintu is in there somewhere. Right. Doris sends her greeting. She's off camera for a while. Yeah. Also, I was joking with Karen and David, who are driving off to Ohio, which is an American state in the northeast part of America, for those of you in other lands, which happens to be very pro-conservative. Sort of, I suggested they take off any bumper stickers on their car that have anything to do with empathy or love or patience or kindness. Things are heating up here in the United States. So before we begin, yeah, I just wanted to remind you of the some of the verses that we've talked about before about the sort of like the initial, when you meditate on the Lan Rim, even before you meditate on the minds that turn the mind toward the Dharma, you meditate on the spiritual friend, on how to rely on the spiritual friend. So the Mahayana spiritual friend, the Gewe Shenyan, Kalya Mitra, I think in Sanskrit, Gesundheit, is there's a verse in the what is it? The Mahayana Sutra Alamkara. I think Mikhail knows this verse, right? Mikhail, what are the, where is Mikhail? Oh, there he is. Mikhail, what are the 10 qualities of the Mahayana guru that mentioned in the famous verse in the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara? I think we've talked about it before, and when I started to recite them, you were reciting along with me.
No, I think I remember talking about that, but no, I don't know them by heart. Sorry.
Okay. Does anyone, Paul, do you know? Shenin Dua She. Yeah, so the Shenin means spiritual friend. So Shenin Dua Shiwa Neshepa Yundin Lakpa Sunche Lunkichuk Deni Raptu Toklap Make Den Sewe Dakni Kulap Pangwaten. So that's a famous verse that's talking about these 10 qualities of the Mahayana guru. The Shenin is someone who is Dua Shiva Nesheba, who has subdued their rough mind through the practice of Vinaya, through the, just observing the vows and trying to be good. Shiva is someone who has pacified their mind also further through the development of tranquil abiding, for instance. And then Neshipa, completely pacified through some recognition of emptiness or selflessness. Yundin Lakpa means someone, Mahayanas, we should rely on a spiritual friend who has more qualities than ourself, even if they have faults that we imagine they have qualities, that as a spiritual teacher, they have greater qualities than we have. Sunche means they are energetic in pursuing the path, and Lungichuk, they have a wealth of the oral tradition of teachings, of spiritual, quotations and teachings and so forth. Shenen Dua Shiwa Neshepa Yondin Lakpa Sunje Lunkichuk Deni Raptu Tokla Make Den. Deni Tokla means they have a deep realization, an understanding of Deni, means ultimate reality, emptiness. So that would be to have a spiritual quality, to have a spiritual master, Mahayana spiritual master. That would be an essential aid also. Make Den, Ma refers to speech. So they are skilled in presenting the Dharma. And Shenendua Shiwa Nesha Ba Yundan Lakpa Sunji Deni Raptu Toklana Sewe Dakni Kyola Pangwaten. So Sewe Dakni means they have the nature of, they have a compassionate nature. Sewe Dakni. They're dominated by that. And Kyola Pang, they have abandoned, this is the one I was meaning to emphasize. They have abandoned sort of like tiredness. Even if the disciples ask the same questions again and again, they are indefatigable. Did I pronounce that right? Indefatigable? Is that right pronunciation, Diana?
Indefatigable.
Indefatigable, thank you.
Unfatigable.
Unfatigable, yeah. So So the way that we create the karma to meet gurus like that is to fulfill their desires, like Milarepa having been asked to build a tower, and then by Marpa, and then Marpa said, "Oh, you did it wrong. I didn't mean that. Tear it down, build another one here." 3 or 4 different towers and different kinds of things like this. All of the things that Naropa had to undergo through his practice with Tilopa and so forth. So we create the karma to have that kind of unfatigable, I'll put it this way, kind of dispositions to be able to answer the questions of others. Okay, I wanted to share that just to remind. So before we begin, anyone have any questions left over? What does Doris have to say here? Oh yeah, okay, she's put the list of the 10 qualities of the Mahayana Guru in the chat there, you can see on the side. So, yeah. Anyone have any questions before we begin? Suvash, you okay? You're not okay? Or you're okay? Okay, good. Okay, so last time we got up to this point in the texts of translated by Jimpa's translation of Gompa Rapsal, page 313, if I'm not mistaken, which corresponds to the FPMT translation by Venerable Joan, page 175, thereabouts. And this outline that we're going to start today, but we're going to review a little bit before, how the dream analogy establishes all entities to be false. So what was the previous outline? What were the previous outlines talking about? What's the context of what we're talking about here? So we're talking about the sort of refuting the Chittamatra point of view that analogy of a dream establishes that there are no external, that you can have consciousness, you can have a truly existent consciousness perceiving objects which are not external objects, that there's no external reality. They would like to have the dream to be able to prove that. So the last outline that we just are finishing was how the dream analogy does not establish the non-existence of external reality. Is that too many negative particles in there? Does not establish the non-existence of external reality. So in other words, the Chittamatrans would like to say that it proves or establishes that external reality is a fiction, that it does not exist. So that was what we were talking about, the context of what we're talking about. And even before that, there was an outline about how the dream analogy does not establish consciousness to be truly existent. So those are so refuting the Chittamatra use of the analogy of the dream. But that doesn't mean the analogy of the dream is not accepted by Prasangika. Prasangika does accept the analogy of the dream, but in a different way. And so that's what we're talking about here, how the dream analogy does establish everything to be, all conventional appearances to be falsities, to be not exist the way that they appear. And so just to read the last question and answer just before that outline. So if you have your page there, how the dream analogy establishes all entities to be false. If you just look in Jimpa's translation, just above that, it says there's a question and a reply. So this is where we were talking last time. So the question was, according to our own system, So what is our own system here?
Asangika, Chandrakirti.
Yeah, here is what it's talking. Is it, according to our Prasangika system, are those forms that are perceived vividly in dreams accepted as mental objects, forms, or not? So Lama Tsongkhapa says, since there is no sensory consciousness in a dream state, right? All the senses are absorbed. When remember when we talk about absorption, it means that the winds that act as the mount of eye consciousness have absorbed to the heart to be able to have even rapid eye movement dreams and to have the deep delta wave sleep, with no contents. But when you have rapid eye movement sleep, when you have the dream state, the consciousnesses, sense consciousnesses have absorbed, and they are not present in a dream state. What appears as the five sense objects, what appears as forms, like the elephants or beautiful woman or man or whatever, or sounds in the dream, someone talking to you, or odors or tastes or tactile sensations, all of them, there are examples of those in dreams as though they were sense objects, like say the soft touch of the person you're having an erotic dream about or something like that, the tactile sensation of that. They are in fact being perceived only by mental consciousness. So although one cannot posit the presence of the five sense objects, such as visible forms, so that means sound, smells, and so forth, also, the objects of dreams are mental object forms. This is analogous to recognizing the vivid perceptions of skeletons in mental consciousness in certain meditative states. Remember when we talked about the bodhisattvas do certain kind of meditations, even in the Hinayana, to imagine a little bone in your head coming out and becoming a skeleton, and that becoming two skeletons, and each of those becoming two more until the whole ground, the whole space around you is pervaded by skeletons. And you can, in the meditative states, have a perception of this, and those are accepted by the Prasangika, the Mahayana in general, as external, as mental object forms. This is analogous to recognizing the vivid perceptions of skeletons in mental consciousness in meditative states as being mental object forms. Out of the 5 types of mental objects, so we talked about this list last time, among those 5 objects, dream objects belong to the category of imputed form, Jimpa said. And I think I took issue with that. So the dream states are, when he says imputed forms, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's also imagined. Kuntak.
Yeah. Imagined forms or imputed. Yeah. Okay. Through this analysis, we should understand the status of many other similar facts. Okay, so that's where we ended last time, and we read a little bit here of this next outline. So we've criticized the use of the dream analogy by Chittamatra. Now, how the dream analogy does establish all entities to be false. This is the Prasangika position. Having established the dreams have no reality on the grounds that what appear as the 3 factors in a dream, object, sense organ, and consciousness, are all unreal, Chandrakirti, to demonstrate the unreality of all the other phenomena that have yet to be established as lacking true existence, states that even during the waking state, all phenomena are proven to lack an intrinsic existence. Okay, does that make sense? So what is it when he says the dreams have no reality? In Tibetan, it says midempa, that they are untrue. So Jimpa, how did Jimpa translate that as they have no reality? So this is talking, they have no true existence. The three factors in a dream, the objects are not real the way that they appear as a findable, intrinsic, truly existent object. The sense organ appears to have some kind of reality, and the consciousness that perceives the objects seems to have some kind of reality. They are all untrue from the Prasangika point of view. They are all falsities, right? Chandrakirti, having established that they are untrue, Chandrakirti demonstrates the unreality of other phenomena that have yet to be established. How is it? Venerable Jones said, therefore, in order to prove other phenomena that are not yet established to be non-truly existent. Now, haven't other phenomena been already proven to be non-truly existent? In our text so far, didn't we prove all phenomena are not truly existent? Savansh?
Venerable George, I thought we did, but it's only in the way in the dream state. Right now, he's taking yet another step to say, even in the waking state, they are all empty.
Right. But so where are we in proving that, we're at the point of proving all phenomena are not inherently existent from that famous first verse of Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. And we've only gotten to the point of, we've already refuted a generation from self, and we're still on the section refuting generation from others. So we haven't yet proved all phenomena. We haven't established the proof yet that all phenomena are not truly existent. Maybe that's the implication here. There's this not yet, that when they put in parentheses, Joan puts not yet in parentheses, established to be not truly existent. We can do that through thoroughly establishing a dream to be non-truly existent. It is proved that even when awake, all phenomena are just not inherently existent. And that's going to be explained by this next three lines of verse 52 of the 6th chapter.
Haven't we also just been focused on the self of phenomenon and not the self of persons? Because doesn't that come later?
You're right. So in the proof that we're in the Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka generally what's proved first of all is the non-inherent existence of phenomena in general. Then is taken up the subject of the selflessness of persons. So remember, they are sort of equivalent, right? If all phenomena are not inherently existent, then the self is not inherently existent. Or you could argue the other way. If the self is not inherently existent, applying the same logic to all phenomena, you can prove that all phenomena are not inherently existent. So this is talking about these two approaches to emptiness. One sees in one sense, Nagarjuna said the root of samsara is avidya. What is avidya? Do you know, Katie?
Kind of ignorance.
Yeah, avidya. Vidya means to know. avidya means not knowing. You say ignorance. So of the root delusions, of the root afflictions, one of them is called ignorance. But Chandrakirti said the root of cyclic existence, contrary to what Nagarjuna said, he said the root of cyclic existence is what? Do you know, Rachel? What was Chandrakirti's position?
Sorry, Venerable George. No.
So he's, as opposed to saying ignorance, he said is the view of the transitory collection, right? The wrong view of the grasping to the self as inherently existent. So those are two different views. They're equivalent, but that's a little bit what's being talked about here. In answer to Sean's question, we're still talking about the non-inherent existence of phenomena. That's what is presented first, generally in the teachings. But when you get around to actually realizing emptiness, it said the first realization of emptiness is through the realization of the non-inherent existence of the self. Sort of the Chandrakirti's point of view. So anyway, here in verse 52, the last three lines say, and as in dreams, here too, in the waking state, phenomena are false and mind has no existence. Well, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist at all. It means it is not truly existent, not inherently existent. There are no objects of experience and no sense and no senses or no, what do we say, wangpo, no indriya, no sense powers either. Okay, so just interesting word here when we talk about chuyu. How did Jimpa translate that? Venerable Joan just translates it as objects. Jimpa translates it as no objects of experience. What does chuyul mean? Does anyone know? Do you know, Mikhail, from?
Yes, something like can also mean like the sphere of enjoyment of or practice. Yeah,
It can mean that. So sometimes in Sanskrit it's vishaya, but the general basic meaning is gochara. What does gochara mean? Do you know, Paul?
Gochara, yeah, well, I mean, I think it's related to go, meaning cow.
Right.
It's like most things in Sanskrit. And chara just means like activity or range of motion or something like that.
Right. So interesting. Yeah, the word go in Sanskrit is a very popular word in English, right? Like, go to the store, get me my Pepsi Cola. But go means cattle or cow in Sanskrit. So chara, like when we talk about Yogacara or when we talk about highest, Charya, Tantra, and so forth, it has to do with activity. So it's the sphere of the cow. It's the domain of the cow, right? The Gochara, the field. What's that out there? Oh, that's the Gochara. That's where the cows enjoy, or that's where they eat the grass and everything like that. So that's kind of the etymology of that. Joan just translates it as objects. In Jimpa's translation, he's translating as Mikhail had suggested at the beginning. There are no objects of experience and so forth. So the commentary to that, Lama Khapa says, just as the three factors, the object, the sense faculty, and the consciousness are false in dreams, right? So this is now using the dream analogy from the Prasangika point of view. We're saying they're false in dreams. What does that mean? Does that mean they're, we could say that they appear to exist, but they don't actually exist the way that they appear, that they're not truly existent in dreams. So here too, that means in the world, in the waking state, it is also true that these phenomena are not truly existent. Therefore, the mind perceiving these phenomena has no intrinsic existence. Does that follow? Therefore, the mind perceiving phenomena has no intrinsic existence. Why does that follow? So if the objects that your mind is perceiving do not truly exist, can one surmise from that? Does it follow that the mind itself that's perceiving them is not truly existent?
Is that because it can't exist without, one can't exist without the other, that they are simultaneous arising mind, consciousness, and object?
So does Prasangika accept that consciousness and its object are simultaneous?
That's what I'm thinking. I
Yeah.
could be incorrect.
Usually consciousness is an effect of, the arisal, let's say the consciousness of a blue flower arises after having, let's say, the eye consciousness of seeing the blue flower. So they're cause and effect. So the object or the objective cause, the mikyan, has to be a cause or condition for the arisal of the consciousness. So they're not simultaneous. That's simultaneity of the object and the consciousness is something that the Chittamatrans would say. The Chittamatra would say. Richard, what do you think?
Well, the statement is phenomena are false here too in the waking state. Therefore, the mind perceiving these phenomena has no intrinsic existence. Since the mind itself is a phenomenon, it follows then that the mind also is false in the sense of having no intrinsic existence.
Yeah. So just as these three factors, object, sense, faculty, and consciousness, are false in dreams, phenomena are false here too in the waking state. So does that prove that? That's just a statement, right?
That's a statement, yes, but if you accept that statement as a factual statement, then it follows that the mind has no intrinsic existence.
Good point. But so here, when it says so, what is it? Are false in dreams, just as they're false in dreams, phenomena are false here too in the waking state. So that doesn't. The analogy hasn't proved that yet. That has to be proved somewhere else, right? So that's why we use the analogy. Suvash, what are you thinking?
Actually, it's exactly what you said is what I was going to ask, is that the Chandrakirti is coming back and making an assertion. So what he's just making an assertion. He hasn't proven his point.
Yeah. So this is the same way that the Chittamatra uses an analogy as though in place of a proof, that they do try to have some other kind of proof. But here, this is just an analogy so far. So this is just, as you say, this is just an assertion. Therefore, the mind perceiving these phenomena has no intrinsic existence, just as there's no intrinsic existence of these objects in a dream. Likewise, there are no objects of experience. This is the gochara, the chuyul. There are no objects of the senses, such as forms and so on. There are no inherently existent visual forms or sounds or smells and so forth. And there's no intrinsically arising sense powers either. Okay. So then he's quoting from, Lama Tsongkhapa quotes Chandrakirti's Basham. Let's see, did I exhaust that? Was there something that, yeah, so Chuyul or Gochara, also sometimes Vishaya, means sphere of activity, domain, range, literally the pasture ground for cattle. Their area, their domain. So the commentary then says, this is stated in the sutra, and I read this last time, but we didn't go over it in detail. Just as one perceives magically conjured animals. So it's really hard to see where Chimpa got animals here. In the Tibetan, it says, Chitar gyume semchen mikbatar. What does semchen mean? Does anyone remember the Tibetan word?
Mind
I think
holder.
Nadine knows. Nadine knows.
He said already, sentient being, mind holder.
Yeah. So
isn't it,
semchen, those which hold the mind, or it's usually in Sanskrit, it's just sattva. But Chimpa, for some reason, is taking it as animals here.
Venerable?
Yes.
Isn't it that in colloquial Tibetan, semchen can mean animal?
Maybe, but
Not sure, have to check, yeah.
but in the sort of the spiritual texts, semchen means sentient being, right? So Venerable Joan translated it as just like observing illusory sentient beings. So at any rate, whether you take that to be why Jimpa took it to be animals, I'm not sure. Just as one perceives magically conjured animals, things, though appearing, do not exist in reality. Maybe he's thinking of like the illusion of a magician making, the illusion of a horse or something like that, or of an elephant. But as Venerable Jones' translation says, just like observing illusory sentient beings, even though they appear in thusness, they are not real. So that applies to sentient beings in general, right? Not just to magically created animals or something like that. So they resemble illusions and are like dreams. This truth has been taught by the Tathagata. So Jimpa mentions at the end of the next verse, so these two verses are quoted from Chandrakirti. So they come sequentially in Madhyamaka Bhasham, in Chandrakirti's own commentary, but Chandrakirti doesn't note where they come from. So this first verse, I'm not sure where this comes from. Does anyone know where this verse comes from? I think it might come from Mahayana Sutra. It might come from Hinayana Sutra. I'm not sure. But the next verse that's quoted is not necessarily from the same text, probably not from the same text, because we know where this next verse comes from. The beings of cyclic existence are dreamlike. There is no birth nor death for anyone. No sentient, or maybe you could say sentience, no human, no life can be found. All these phenomena are like foam or a banana tree. And then there's a final statement there that says, Jimpa says, statements such as these are then become truly well uttered. So this verse, you remember I mentioned last time where this verse comes from? Anyone remember? This comes, I mentioned that you could find this verse in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary to the Prasanapada called Ocean of Reasoning on page 124. There he says, one should understand that the point of these arguments is to refute the coming and going of all produced phenomena. So this is in chapter 2. of that's commenting on Fundamental Wisdoms, Chapter 2, which is the chapter on coming and going. The following quotation from the Samadhi Raja Sutra are provided to illustrate that. So he says, the victor, or the conqueror, means the Buddha, who lacks all vices and who is endowed with the 10 powers, has taught the supreme meditative absorption. And then this verse comes, beings in cyclic existence are like dreams. They are unborn and undying. Sentient beings, humans, and life are not found. These phenomena are like foam or like plantain trees, or Chimpa translated banana trees or something like that, or others translate that way. So this second verse is from the Samadhi Raja Sutra. And in The Ocean of Reasoning by Lama Tsong Khapa, when he quotes that verse, he says, this says that sentient beings are essentially coming from a previous life, coming from a previous life inherently, or going to the next life inherently, has been refuted, because when they are sought, they are not found. When you try to seek them, right? So that second verse comes from the Samadhi Raja Sutra, although in Jimpa's note, I think 575, he says, what? If I go back there, that note says, both sutra citations are found in the commentary in Chandrakirti's Bhashyam, but neither Chandrakirti nor Tsongkhapa identified their sources. So we could also say, Jimpa also didn't identify their sources, but the second one comes from the Samadhi Raja Sutra. The first one, if you search in the Samadhi Raja Sutra, you don't find the first verse, so it comes from some other sutra, whether it's Mahayana or Hinayana, it's not clear. Okay, so do those verses make sense? These are supposedly taught by the Tathagata. The first verse ends that, says, this truth has been taught by the Tathagata. So probably, quoting these as authoritative scriptural references that although things appear to be truly existent, they don't exist that way. They instead are like illusions and like dreams. So the dream analogy could be used here from the Prasangika point of view, because although they appear to be real in dreams, when you wake from the dream, you know that they're not real. In the same way, when you wake from the sleep of ignorance, when you wake from the dream of ignorance that's grasping to phenomena as being inherently existent, phenomena are like illusions. They're like dreams. Okay, so Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, the next statement in Jimpa is where it says, statements such as these then become truly well-uttered insights. I think Jones' translation is better. These statements and others will be explained, will be well explained. Okay, so the commentary continues. The phrase, no birth for anyone, where did that come? No birth for anyone. That's the second line of the second verse that was just quoted. The beings of cyclic existence are dreamlike. There is no birth nor death for anyone. So the phrase, no birth for anyone, and so on, that means no death for anyone, should be understood just as in the case above, where the negation is expressed with the phrase, when you say there's no birth for anyone, they do not exist in reality. It doesn't mean that there's no birth conventionally. It means that there's no truly existent birth. There's no inherently existent birth. There's no inherently existent death. There's no truly existent death. These sutra passages demonstrating all phenomena as lacking existence in actual reality fit well with the Madhyamaka standpoint, but not with that of Chittamatra. This is why Chandrakirti states that these sutra citations become truly well-uttered insights. Venerable Jones translates, what does she translate there? That no one dies and so forth is to be affixed, like qualifying the object of negation, saying, in suchness they are not real. Chandrakirti says that it will be well explained. That's how she's translated. Jimbas again says this is why they're well uttered or something. Venerable Joan translates that as Chandrakirti says it will be well explained that the explanation in these sutras by means of the example of a dream that all phenomena are not established in suchness is acceptable to the Madhyamakas, but not to the Chittamatrans. Okay, making sense? Do you get the general idea? Nadine, what do you think? You have a doubt?
Venerable George, I remember there's one verse of Shantideva. He said, therefore, wandering beings resemble a dream. Upon discerning analysis, they're the same as a plantain tree. Shantideva said it.
Right, so that's talking about
a dream.
So Shantideva probably was referring to Samadhi Raja Sutra. That's the second verse we know is actually found in the Samadhi Raja Sutra. But the first verse is one that we're in doubt about. Okay, so the main thing that's been talked about here is that Chandrakirti has rejected, and Lama Tsongkhapa has explained the rejection, that the Chittamatra use of the analogy of a dream proves what they wanted to prove. They think that's a perfect example to prove that consciousness is truly existent and there's no external reality, both of which are rejected by Prasangika, refuted quite logically, whereas Prasangika Madhyamaka does accept the analogy of a dream to be valid to explain the non-true existence of phenomena. So, for instance, in the post-meditative state, after you rise from meditation on emptiness, direct realization of emptiness, when you arise from that and phenomena are appearing to you, we call that the illusion-like or sometimes dream-like meditation on emptiness, right? When you're meditating on emptiness, what is that called? The space-like meditation on emptiness, right? So space-like, when you're meditating on emptiness, all there is a vacuity like space. And then when you arise from that and phenomena appear, through the force of remembering your realization of emptiness, you think, they're like, they look real, but I know they're not. This is like an illusion, like a magician's illusion, or like a dream. When you wake up from a dream and you realize that what you were dreaming about did not actually exist. Okay. So then the text continues with the next verse, the Karikas. So here, just as with the waking state, have we done that? Yeah, this is where we are. So here, just as with the waking state, the three factors of dream exist until woken up. The three factors of a dream exist until woken up. So they exist conventionally, that one is perceiving them in the dream until you wake up, and then they no longer exist to you, right? When you say, oh, that didn't happen. There was no elephant there. There was no, humiliating situation that I dreamed about. Upon rising from the dream, the three become no more. So it is for those awakened from the sleep of ignorance, the sleep of, he says, he likes to translate moha or timug as delusion. That's how often people translate it that way. Earlier, when Lama Zopa Rinpoche was teaching in Lama Yeshe, we would often translate nyonmong or klesha as delusion. So I have some disinclination to translate timug or moha as delusion. But anyway, so when one awakens from the sleep of ignorance, who would qualify to be awakened from the sleep of ignorance?
The Arya.
An Arya being? Yeah, maybe. Awakened from the sleep of delusion or of ignorance. So Arya beings are free of all afflictions, all delusions, Sean?
Well, the ones on the pure realm would be free of all of them.
On the pure grounds, yeah. Not the pure realms. Yeah, the pure realms may be something else, but the pure grounds, the 8th, 9th, and 10th, they are free of delusions, yeah. So let's see what the commentary says here. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, so here, with respect to people in the world, there are some who, though caught in ignorance's sleep, they're trapped in the sleep of ignorance, they are free from ordinary sleep in the sense of being awake. What's that say? So here, with respect to people in the world, there are some, so we're talking about sentient beings in the world. They're not talking about Buddha yet, right? There are some who, though caught in ignorance's sleep, are free from ordinary sleep in the sense of being awake. What does that mean?
Is that not the same thing of like where you recognize that even though things appear as inherently existing, you are recognizing that they're not. So in that sense, you're free of the normal sleep that everyone else is under.
Yeah, so Venerable Joan translated, so here with respect to the people of the world, there are some who, although caught in the sleep of unknowing, this moha, are free from ordinary sleep in the sense of being awake. And then she continues, we haven't read Jimpa's translation of this yet. Nothing arises for them through its own essence, but within the dreamlike perspective of sleep of ignorance, all three factors, the objects, sense powers, and consciousnesses, for instance, do not exist inherently for them. Just as within the waking state, for someone who is asleep, as long as they remain in that state until woken up, all three factors, objects, sense powers, and consciousnesses of dream continue to exist. Yet upon rousing, she's using Jimpa's rousing. What does rousing mean? Is that a common word?
Or rising.
No, it's waking.
Rousing means waking. Is that what you said?
Waking in the general sense, and can also mean neurologically, like the sort of activation of neurological energy.
Rousing, yeah. How do you use it? You say rousing from sleep?
Yes.
Okay, so that's apparently correct here. Yet upon rousing from sleep, the three things of dream become no more. Masepa Namla. Okay. So let's try to figure out what this is saying. So here, with respect to people of the world, there are some who, though caught in ignorance of sleep, are free from ordinary sleep in a sense of being awake. So Sean has suggested that means we're talking about Arya beings on the pure grounds, bodhisattvas on the pure grounds, or arhats. Well, they wouldn't be arhats, would they?
No, sorry. We are talking about people caught in ignorant sleep.
Right. So they're definitely not arhats, but there are Arya beings who have, well, let's say the bodhisattvas on the three pure grounds have not yet eliminated all of the afflictions, right? Or have they?
They've eliminated the afflictions, but not the obscurations to knowledge.
Okay, right. They've eliminated all of the afflictions. So they're like Hinayana arhats. So they're not caught in ignorance as sleep, right? So who is being talked about here? So here, with respect to people in the world, there are some who, though caught in ignorance as sleep, are free from ordinary sleep in the sense of being awake.
And it must mean the Aryas that are on the path of seeing.
Yeah, or on the path of meditation before the pure grounds. Yeah. Nothing arises for them through its own essence. Nothing is intrinsically or inherently produced for them. So that means they've realized emptiness. So they have to be on the path of seeing or on the path of meditation before the pure grounds, right? But within the dreamlike perspective of ignorance is sleep, all three factors, objects, sense organs, and cognitions, do exist intrinsically for them. What does that mean? Paul, what do you think? A little bit. I remember Geshe Sopa saying it in this section. It's hard sometimes to follow what Lama Tsongkhapa was saying. I remember when His Holiness the Dalai Lama would give teachings on Tantra sometime, and I wasn't present. It was the High Lamas and the Geshes were there, and His Holiness would hold up the Petra for some point and say, "This point is difficult to understand. What does this mean?" And all the other, no one would say anything, but Lama Yeshe in the middle of the crowd raised his hand, and I can't remember who told me this. Maybe Glenn Mullen told me this, and explained what that point was. So sometimes what Lama Tsongkhapa is getting at, you have to be almost a scholar to understand what he's talking about. So when we're talking about here, some who though caught in ignorance is sleep. Okay, so they're not yet arhats, are free from ordinary sleep in the sense of being awake. What kind of awakeness does this mean? Nothing arises from them through its own essence, but within the dreamlike perspective of ignorance is sleep, because they still have ignorance, right? All three factors, objects, sense organs, and cognitions, do exist, and Jimpa says intrinsically for them. Not sure if that's the right interpretation, whether that should mean all three of them exist. And Venerable Joan also uses inherently for them. if you take it that way, then for whom are these things inherently existing? So it says in the within the dreamlike perspective of ignorance is sleep, the dreamlike perspective. So that refers to the illusion-like meditation on emptiness. When they arise from the meditative equipoise on emptiness, these things, all three factors, objects, sense organs, and conditions, do exist. If you want to say inherently for them, that would mean that they appear to be inherently existent. Or you could say all three factors do exist conventionally for them. Yeah, not exactly clear. The text continues, just as with the waking state, someone who is asleep, just as with the waking state, for someone who is asleep, as long as they remain in that state until woken up, until, until they're awakened, the three factors, objects, senses, and cognitions of dream continue to exist. Just as with the waking state, for someone who is asleep, as long as they remain in that state until woken up, the three factors of dream continue to exist. Yet upon rousing from sleep, the three things of their dream become no more. So it is, now a new thought. So it is for the Buddhas who, having awakened from or eradicated the sleep of delusion in its entirety, have actualized the ultimate expanse of reality. For them, all three factors no longer exist at all. Don't they exist for them? Don't the three factors exist conventionally? What does he mean that they don't exist at all for the Buddhas? Objects, consciousness, sense organs. Don, it looks like you're about to give an idea.
I think it means inherently, it doesn't exist inherently at all.
Oh, yeah. So one would have to think that, for the Buddhas who have awakened from or eradicated the sleep of delusion in its entirety, they have actualized the ultimate expanse of reality. That's another synonym for emptiness. For them, all three factors no longer exist at all. Maybe you could say within that meditative equipoise, the omniscient mind, in the perspective of the omniscient mind, perceiving emptiness, they don't exist at all. So consciousness in the absence of external reality, as posited by Chittamatra, has no existence at all. Okay, not easy to understand what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here. This said, Jimpa translates, it is from the perspective of a Buddha's seeing the way things really are, emptiness. So that's it, in the perspective of the omniscient mind perceiving Chitawa, the way things really are. So that means the omniscient mind has perceives all phenomena, emptiness and conventional reality. It perceives conventional reality not by the force of conventional reality appearing to it directly, but the omniscient mind knows conventional things through knowing the minds of sentient beings, which are perceiving conventional phenomena, right? Which are conceiving, what do we say it? What do we say? Conventional truth. How do we say in Sanskrit? What do we say? Conventional truth is what? So it's satya is truth. What do we say? we say
Samvriti Satya.
samvriti satya, right? So samvriti means obscuring or obscured, or when we say truth for, Jeffrey always said truth for a jerk, right? Samvriti satya. So they perceive samvriti satya by knowing the minds of sentient beings, which are samvriti, which are obscured and so forth. This said, it is from the perspective of a Buddhist seeing the way things really are, that is emptiness, that the three factors are not perceived. So within that meditative equipoise on emptiness. As for his seeing, as for a Buddha's seeing things in their diversity, so that's from the perspective of seeing the conventional reality, although no perception arises from the Buddha's mind being infected by the propensities of ignorance, it does know these three factors through perceiving what appears to sentient beings whose minds are thus afflicted. That's consistent with what we were just saying, right? What do you think, Richard?
It seems pretty clear to me. Maybe
Okay.
some nuance I'm not getting, but this seems very clear.
Okay. So it seems. How about you, Anna? You following?
Thank you, Venerable George. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain this very, very clearly. If I read this by myself, I would be lost.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so let's take a little break. I think Louise is trying to nudge me, take a little break. Time for a cup of tea or coffee or a little other kind of break. Thank you. Good to see you back. So we're going to now start, unless they have a question. Anyone have a question about what we just finished? We just finished that section. That was, the title of that was How the Dream Analogy Establishes All Entities to be False. So it's not as though it's proving that the dream, that an analogy proves anything. An analogy is just something that's used as a way of understanding something better. So now we're getting to the next section, refuting the analogy of seeing floating hairs. So if you're following in the Tibetans, this just says Nipa Ni. Nipa means second, and the final Ni just means is as follows. So I think the first one was how the dream analogy establishes all entities to be false. Now we're in refuting the analogy of seeing floating hairs. So so the Chittamatra also use analogy of seeing floating hairs, seeing floaters, and the Prasangika also uses it. But like the analogy of a dream, they use it in different ways. And so the Prasangika Chandrakirti is going to show here that the way that the Chittamatra are using the example or the analogy of floaters doesn't hold water, is wrong, and it's going to propose its own interpretation of that. So the text is translated by Jimpa as, if Chittamatra asserts, quote, those with myodesopsia, remember that's a medical term for the Tibetan word rabrip. I've forgotten. What is rabrip in Sanskrit, Paul?
I forget, Venerable George.
Okay. I thought we've kind of crossed it before. So rabrip sometimes is mistranslated as cataract. But this doesn't mean cataract. It means a particular kind of malady like I have, many of us have to some degree, that where you see little bits floating around in space as though there are, maybe in some certain cases, it seems like hairs are falling down, if you have a very bad case of it. So if Chittamatra asserts those with myodysopsia perceive floating hairs and so on that do not actually exist. That's true, right? We would say that. Similarly, even though no external reality exists, from the point of view of Chittamatra, they're trying to make an analogy here. Even though there's no external reality, consciousness does exist by virtue of its intrinsic nature. And his note, Jimpa's note there, 567, says, a classic example of Chittamatra's use of this analogy of the vision of floating hairs is verse 1 of Vasubandhu's 20 verses. What is Vasubandhu's 20 verses? Do you know, Mikhail?
No, sorry, exactly no.
So remember, Vasubandhu was the Sangha's brother. He wrote Abhidharma Kosha and the Bhasham, talking about the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika systems. But he was a logician, and he was also practiced the Mahayana. He became converted to the Mahayana, and he wrote many treatises on Chittamatra, one of the most famous of which is called the 20 Stanzas. So this is a Chittamatra text. So Jimpa said in note 576, a classic example of Chittamatra's use of the analogy of the vision of floating hairs is verse 1 of Vasubandhu's 20 Stanzas, where one reads, and Jimpa's translation says, all this is only consciousness, the appearance of non-existent external objects. So external objects don't exist, but the appearance of them is like someone with an eye malady, someone with this floaters, right? Who sees non-existent webs of hair. And Jimpa says, for an alternative translation of the verse, see Stephen Anaker's text, 7 works on Vasubandhu. Some of you have that text, right? Mikhail, do you have in your voluminous library, Stephen Anaker's? It's a good one. Has some important translations in there. So there, I happen to have that text. So he says in the commentary, so Vasubandhu wrote the 20 stanzas, Chittamatra text, and he also wrote a commentary to that. So in the commentary, it says, in the great vehicle, Mahayana, the 3 realms of existence are determined as being perception only. That means that are mind only, right? They're vijnana matra, the same as chitta matra. As is said in the sutra, and I think he's quoting the Dashabhumika, the Ten Bhumi Sutra, the 3 realms of existence are chitta only, are chitta matra, are mind only, is a famous quotation. Chitta or manas, consciousness and perception are synonyms. By the word chitta, chitta along with its associations is intended here. The word only, when we say chitta matra or mind only, is said to rule out any external object of sense or understanding. So this is talking from the Chittamatra point of view, right? So then he continues. This is the verse in question that Jimpa just translated above. All this is perception only, mind only, because of the appearance of non-existent objects. Just as there may be seeing of non-existent nets of hair by someone afflicted by an optical disorder. So this is from the Dashabhumika, the Ten Bhumi Sutra. So Chandrakirti quotes the Dashabhumika many, many times in his Bhashyam. Okay, so Stephen, I think you had your hands up first. What are you thinking?
You mean Richard?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Did I say Stephen? Yeah. Richard.
Thank you. I had one question and now I have two, but they're probably related. The first one is the word similarly. I don't see in the text how those with myodysopsia perceive floating hairs and so on that do not actually exist. I don't see how that's similar to, even though no external reality exists, consciousness does exist by virtue of its intrinsic nature. I don't see the similarity in the two statements.
Right. So if you just take the first part of it, similarly, even though external reality does not exist, or say, leave off the word even. So the similarity is similarly, no external reality exists, similar to someone with myodysopsia, perceives floating hairs and so on that do not exist. So although external reality doesn't exist from the Chittamatra point of view, it still appears in the same way that floating hairs that don't exist still appear to someone with floaters.
Yeah, that part I get. That's the second part. Consciousness does exist by virtue of its intrinsic nature. I
Right.
don't see where that follows. I don't see what's similar about that to the first sentence.
Right, exactly. So in the analogy of a dream, the Chittamatra was using the analogy of the dream to say that no external reality exists, and also that consciousness exists inherently or truly.
Oh, okay, okay.
So that was similar. They're using it to prove both things. So
Oh,
so even though no external reality exists, consciousness does exist by virtue of its intrinsic nature. So what did he say? 576. Yeah, so that was when Jimpa's note there was talking about that analogy. So so Diana, you have a question first.
I think it was answered, but it might be useful. The paragraph begins with the word if Chittamatra asserts, which I would normally think indicates maybe they do and maybe they don't. I think it would have read more cleanly if it had been translated as if they were to assert, which they do.
Yeah,
but it set me off. I look at words like that as signposts. And so the whole paragraph afterwards, I might read differently because the word if implies maybe yes, maybe no.
right. So maybe you could take it as when Chittamatra asserts, when they assert that, this too is untenable.
Yeah, that's very clean. Thank you.
So at the end of that phrase in the Tibetan, it says shena. So shena can mean if they say, but you can also understand it as when they say that, because they do say that. So why is this so? Chandrakirti writes, and so now he's giving the next Karika 654 and 655. So we're already verse 54, 55 of the 6th chapter. The cognition of one suffering from defective sight, that means this rabrip or, darn, I can't remember the.
Timira.
Timira, right, Timira. So in Sanskrit, that's referring to this. It does have, if you look in the Sanskrit dictionary, it does have some different flavors of meaning, but mainly is referring to this particular defect of eye, where it appears that there are floaters falling down or floating. The cognition of one suffering from floaters, let's say, perceives floating hair because of this malady. You can say falling hair. For such cognition, both floating hair and its perceptions are true. So for someone with this myodysopsia, it's true. They think that there is hair falling down or floating around, and they think that the perception, they think, yeah, my sight is right. It's not something that is experienced with the mental consciousness. It's a defect of the eye, right? For such cognition, both floating hair and its perception are true. That is for the cognition of that person. They believe it. They believe there's floating hairs or falling hairs, and they believe that their perception is true. For those who have clear sight, however, someone without floaters, when they look at the area where the person who has floaters, say the classic example is that they're eating their gruel, their oatmeal or their soup or whatever, and they think there's hair falling into it, right? So they call the waiter over or something like that. And the waiter, who has no problem with floaters, they don't see any hair falling into their gruel, into their soup or whatever, their tukpa. So that for those who have clear sight, both these things are false. So the perception of not only are there no falling hairs, the perception of falling hairs is also false, right? Is wrong. So then it continues, the next verse. If cognition exists without the cognized, okay, so now we're getting into this other argument about whether you can have a cognition without an object of cognition, whether you can have a consciousness without an object. If cognition exists without the cognized, one should see floating hair even without the malady. Without the malady that makes the eyes see such things. Sorry, the last part of that. This is not the case, and so no such cognition exists. Okay, following? Luis, how are you doing? The fog of COVID has removed your...
Yeah, this is funny. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, it's good. Doris is I'm not sure what that emoji is. Oh, thumbs up. Okay, thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay.
Would you mind repeating that again?
Which one?
Oh, just said with that verse.
So I'm going to paraphrase the first one where Jimpa's translation begins, the cognition of one suffering from the defective sight. So the consciousness of someone with floaters, the eye consciousness of someone with floaters, they perceive floating hair or falling hair. Usually in the scriptures, it's mainly talking about falling hair because the person they have their soup there in front of them and they're complaining that there's hair falling into it or there's hair in it. So if you want to say that there's floaters that just sort of stabilize there, it's just as though there are particles in your soup. Or if there's the sense of the floaters falling hair, it's that things that are falling into my soup. The consciousness of one with this kind of eye defect perceives falling or floating hair because of his malady. For such an eye consciousness, both the falling or floating hair and its perception are accurate. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. There's hair falling in my soup, waiter, and my perception is true. For those who have clear sight, that means who don't have this malady of seeing floaters or falling hair, both these things are false. There is no falling hair falling into your soup, sir, and your perception of that is wrong. I'm sorry, I'm not going to bring you another bowl of soup. So the second verse says, if a consciousness exists without an object to be cognized, one should see floating hair even without this malady that makes the eye see such things. This is not the case, and so no such cognition exists. So we need commentary to that. So this is going to be Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, paraphrasing the commentary by Chandrakirti all the time. Sometimes he adds some words, sometimes he leaves some things out. So the commentary to those two verses says, the cognition of one suffering from defective eyesight perceives floating hair because of his malady or falling hair, right? Now, for such cognition of the person, both the visual perception and its object, the floating hair, are true. For that person who has this malady, both of those things are true. There are falling hairs, and if you ask them, how do you know? Yeah, because I perceive it. My perception is true. Yet from the perspective of those who have clear sight, in other words, those whose vision has not been affected by such a malady, both of these things, what appears as floating or falling hair, as well as the cognition that perceives it, are false. In Jimpa Trance, both are unborn. I think that a little bit, maybe gives a little bit the wrong impression. Venerable Joan translated, whereas relative to those who clearly see objects, that is, those who see with eyes that lack eye floaters, both the appearance of falling hair and the consciousness to which they appear are false. That is, they are not produced. I think that's the better translated. To say that they're unborn almost is talking about emptiness, but it's just that there's no production of such a consciousness for someone who doesn't have that malady. For without an object, even a merely appearing one, it would be difficult to posit the existence of cognition. However, this is exactly what the opponent will have to admit. So, yeah, that's an important point. So what is that getting at? Let me see. Does anyone have a glint in their eye that they... Paul, you have some glint of understanding. What does that say?
I mean, it just seems to me that he's sort of doubling down on the fact that you can't have a cognition without an object. As he says that even just a merely appearing object.
Right. So what is a merely appearing object in this case?
Well, in this case, it would be the hairs that are seen.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, or the
Yeah.
floats. So that's merely appearing to the person, although it has no actual external reality. So it's saying, for without an object, even a merely appearing one, it would be difficult to posit the existence of cognition. However, this is exactly what the opponent will have to admit. Why is that? What is Lama Tsongkhapa, and well, he's paraphrasing Chandrakirti. What is Chandrakirti getting at here?
But that's
Go on.
That's what the Chittamatra would just said with the dream analogy. They said there is no external object and mind exists truly.
Right. So it's getting to that point. So originally the question, I think, I always want to call Richard Stephen for some reason. Stephen sent his apologies. He's dealing with some medical issues, so he's going to listen to the recording later. So Richard brought up earlier why it was saying two things about there's no external reality and consciousness exists or something. So that's apparently what's being mentioned here. For without an object, even a merely appearing one, it would be difficult to posit the existence of cognition. However, this is exactly what the Chittamatra would have to admit. Okay, so you have to think about what's actually being meant here. If one does not admit that, the above consequence, and asserts that even without the cognized floating hair, there is an intrinsically real cognition perceiving floating hair that exists for someone afflicted by floaters, in that case, one should see floating hair even without the malady. Why is that?
It inherently exists.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Louise,
because they're not connected. The inherently existent mind can, why not see it everywhere? You know, there's no connection.
right. If something intrinsically exists, if there's an intrinsically real cognition perceiving floating hairs, even though there are no floating hairs in reality, one should see floating hairs even without the malady. Why is that? Is Louise is saying, if the consciousness, the I consciousness that's perceiving this, exists inherently, intrinsically, from its own side, it will have no relation with anything else. It won't be dependent upon anything else. So you could say that it would see floating, it could see floating hair even without that malady, without the appearance of floating hairs to it. The defect that makes the eyes see such things as floating hair. Oh yeah, he's adding all of these extra phrases. The defect that makes the eyes see such things as floating hair. For they are both exactly equal insofar as non-existence of their objects are concerned. Right? We've run across similar arguments in Nagarjuna's texts before. So, yeah. Both are exactly equal. That is, the seeing of floaters when you have the malady and seeing of floaters when you don't have the malady. If the consciousness, if the I consciousness is inherently existent, you should see floaters in both, possibly in both situations, or never in any situation. All right. Mintu, you following? Are you in your flower garden in San Jose?
Yeah, I am following. I think this is so cool. Um,
Oh, nice garden. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad you're enjoying. Okay, so let's continue. This argument is similar to the one where it's demonstrated that if something arises from an intrinsically real other, remember when we've refuted, so we refuted arising from self, and we've essentially used the arguments to refute arising from an inherently existent other. That was already done, right? We haven't yet addressed arising from both and from neither, which means arising without any causes, although those are easy to understand. So we've already talked about this, that when we talked about refuting arising from an intrinsically existent other, intrinsically real other, if something arises from something which is inherently different than itself, it must then do so from everything else that is other. It should be able to arise from anything else that's other, not just its, let's say, the sprout. wouldn't arise from an inherently other seed. It would also arise from an inherently other cow, an inherently other sun or moon or rock or whatever, anything else that is entirely different than itself, inherently different in itself, it would have to arise from that. Here too, so using that example, here too, if something arises from an intrinsically real consciousness, if the consciousness that's perceiving is intrinsically real, intrinsically existent, the non-existence of floating hair being equal, one cannot maintain that someone with an eye malady sees floating hair while the perception of floating hair does not arise in someone free from such a malady. You would have to say that if the eye consciousness is inherently existing, then the eye consciousness, even without the malady, without having that defect of the eye organ, or the physical eye, is not the eye organ, that person should also, someone with pure sight, good sight, should also see floating hairs because it's inherently different.
But isn't the Chittamatra argument that the floating hair and the mind perceiving the floating hair should be the same?
Not the same. They're the same entity. They do say there's a difference between the object and subject, but not different in the way that it appears as an external object. You can still differentiate between the consciousness and the object. Chittamatra, yeah, because that's how they appear, right? The consciousness, eye consciousness seeing a blue flower seems to be different than the blue flower itself. They say that's an illusion, that they actually are the same entity. They arise from the same seed, right? Okay, let's see. Just long paragraphs with sometimes added too many words because Lama Tsongkhapa is trying to put in the commentary and the root verses here. Here too, if something arises from an intrinsically real consciousness, the non-existence of floating hair being equal, one cannot maintain that someone with an eye malady sees floating hair, while the perception of floating hair does not arise in someone free of such a malady. If something arises from an intrinsically existent, where is it? Something arises from intrinsically real consciousness. Venerable Jones says, if it is produced from an inherently existent other, it implies that it is produced from everything that is other. Similarly, if an inherently existent consciousness is produced, I think the word order is better there. If an inherently existent consciousness is produced, would Prasangika accept that an inherently existent consciousness can be produced? Why not, Richard?
Because nothing is inherently existent.
Right. But if something were to be inherently existent, it would have no relationship.
Right.
Change.
Yeah.
It would have to be permanent, and so it couldn't be produced. Right. Yeah. Either way you look at it.
That's the point he's trying to make here.
Right. If an inherently existent consciousness is produced, I think the word order there is better than Jimpa's translation. Here too, if something arises from an intrinsically real consciousness. Venerable Jones says, if an inherently existent consciousness is produced, given that, and then in brackets, those with eye floaters and those with eye without eye floaters, end bracket, are the same in that, in terms of the object, falling hair not existing, it would not be justifiable for the sight of falling hair to be produced in those with eye floaters, but for the sight of falling hair not to be produced in those without eye floaters. Yeah. Still, all of it becomes very wordy there. Following a little bit? Nadine, how are you doing?
I think you should read the next sentence there because then it explains that.
Okay, good. Just checking. Okay. This is because, as Sean has said, this is going to explain it. This is because with the implication that such a cognition, seeing floating hair, does not depend on the presence of the I malady. This is because with the implication that such a cognition does not depend on the presence of the I malady, we can force the consequence. So you're debating with someone, so we can force upon them that it will follow that these two will be totally unrelated to each other. So since it is not the case that cognition of floating hair arises without such an I malady, no such intrinsically real cognition in the absence of external reality exists at all. So this follows up the second part of refuting that analogy. So there were two parts to that analogy. We're talking about the floating hairs. Okay. Making sense? I'm not sure. Don always looks like he's about to say something. Do you have some thought, Don, or no?
We're just thinking I need to spend a little more time with this thought.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, to go over this and to compare the two translations is helpful. If you know Tibetan, then you can compare the Tibetan. The actual Sanskrit, there might be some fragments, but we believe, as Paul has mentioned many times, the Sanskrit of Chandrakirti's Bhasham supposedly does exist, but it has not been published yet. Is that right, Paul?
Yes, it's being translated in. It's being translated in Vienna. They have access to the manuscript, and
so someone like Paul or John who reads Sanskrit, they could go back and see the corresponding place in Chandrakirti. Those of you know Tibetan, you could check the translation of Chandrakirti in Tibetan or Lama Tsongkhapa's translation here in Tibetan. But those of us who don't know either, you can read the Venerable Jones translation as opposed to Jimpa's translation and try to go back over our notes from the class.
I was going to say sometimes, although I feel like I have some understanding, the words are very entangling.
Yes. That's sometimes you'd like to please paraphrase that, please. Make it truncate, leave off the qualifying phrases and just get to the essence. Okay, so let's just read this next. We're going to enter now into a new section, which has a lot of subsections. So this section in the Tibetan just says Nipa La Sum. So that means the second outline, this is a major outline, has three parts. So that second outline is refuting the referent, the arising of consciousness devoid of external reality through the potency of propensities. So again, this is going to be refuting some Chittamatra ideas, right? Because what did they say? That consciousness can arise without external reality. How can it arise? Through the power of the propensities, the imprints in the mind, either the So they're used both ways. Sabon or bakchak, both are used in the Chittamatra system here, that from some seed, when it ripens, both the consciousness and its object arise together, right? From the potency of the propensities. That's what is being talked about here. So this major outline, and Chimpa's note there, 577, just says, this is the second part of the actual refutation of the Chittamatra school's postulation of intrinsically real consciousness. So remember I said Nipa La Sum. So there was a first part when we refuted it. Now this is the second part. Tsongkhapa divides this critique into two aspects: refuting the analogy or the example, pei, proposed to demonstrate intrinsic reality of consciousness, which was mentioned on page 307. So that's what we were talking about, all of the refuting the analogy. Now the second part is refuting the referent, what he says the referent, or the object, the dun in Tibetan, D-O-N. What is dun in Sanskrit, Mikhail?
Sorry, you asked me? No, I have no knowledge of Sanskrit.
What is dun in Sanskrit, Paul?
Artha,
usually
like
artha.
Artha, right? Sometimes artha can mean, like we say, highest meaning truth. Dun dam dempa. Dun dam dempa. Highest meaning truth. Dun dam dempa. So Tsongkhapa, so this is the second part in the actual refutation of the Chittamatra school postulation of intrinsically real consciousness. So one was they were trying to use the example, various examples of the dream or falling hair to prove that there was inherently existent phenomena, inherently existent consciousness. That's been refuted. Now, the second part is refuting that the referent, as he says, or the object of such analogy, the existence of consciousness in the absence of external reality. The second part of the refutation starts from here. Okay, so that's giving some background. So this has three parts: refuting the view that cognitions of external reality arise or do not arise from maturation or its lack. Okay, we'll have to unpack that later. Second, refuting the opponent's restatement that consciousness without external reality exists. So that means the Chittamatra, once we've refuted some of their views, they're going to restate that there's still consciousness without external reality, right? Because it arises from propensities and so forth. And three, how refuting the Chittamatra standpoint does not contradict the scriptures. So that's a very deep subject there also. So the first of those, refuting the view that cognitions of external reality arise or do not arise from maturation or its lack. I've added an extra ariser. This has two parts. Again, for those who sort of Abhidharmists by heart, who like long lists and things like that, they revel in such these kind of outlines. This is two parts: stating the opponent's position, stating the Chittamatra position, and refuting that position. So I'm just going to read this, and we're going to continue next week, and maybe talk, if you have questions, we can talk on Monday. So stating the opponent's position. So this is the Chittamatra position in the first three lines of verse 656. Now, if you assert that such perceptions do not occur in those who have clear sight, because the potentiality has not matured, it's not merely that the cognizable objects do not exist. Okay, so we're going to unpack that next time. Going over a little bit. I hope you're okay. We'll see you on Monday for discussion. I missed discussion the last 2 weeks. Any questions before we end? How are you doing? So faces are okay. Nadine's looking again. Okay, Nadine, do you have any questions? No? Okay. Anyone? Diana? Doris? Okay. So this is a time of, for those of us in America, this is a time of, to be Kadampa Geshis, to try to transform the adverse conditions that we're experiencing, the various kinds of fears, people disdaining climate change and so many other things, and the political front. One has to be able to transform these into the path. So as we dedicate our merits that we've created and the collection of wisdom that we've created, let's try to keep that in mind also, that we will be successful in our everyday, continuing, talking to our relatives or people who are holding, very different, seemingly unacceptable positions. Hopefully we can be like Chandrakirti in refuting Chittamatra, who believe in that, that we pray that we can dedicate our merits, that we can eventually be able to refute these positions unequivocally to those who hold them, these wrong positions. So let's put up the dedication prayers. So think of that we've, due to our motivation at the beginning and due to our actions, both sort of like the motivating factor and the merits and wisdom that we've accumulated, due to these virtues, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha, from which state I can lead all living beings, all migrators without exception, into that enlightened state, into that very same state. And then the prayer from a prayer to Maitreya, which we use oftentimes as a dedication. So the implication is, due to these merits, may the supreme precious Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow due to these virtues. And due to these virtues, may that which has arisen already, that exists in my mind and the mind of others, not diminish, but increase more and more. And then a prayer for the quick return to see the face of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher, I think refers to Shakyamuni, an assembly of children of the victorious ones, Bodhisattvas, you Shravakas also, and Pratika Buddhas, victorious Losang, so referring to Losang Drapa Tsongkhapa as though he was the second Buddha, the conqueror Losang, who was the spiritual father to his two spiritual sons, Kedrupche and Gyaltsabche, together with your Gelugpa lineage and all the objects of refuge of the infinite realms, please bestow here and now the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In upholding and spreading the Munis, Shakyamuni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you, Lama Zopa, wore the patience, the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make this request. You who are the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the conqueror's teachings, the Buddhist teachings, and for the welfare of mother living beings, you departed suddenly to peace. You suddenly without warning, you passed away, at which point I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truths of the oceanic blessings of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the bodhisattvas, so this is calling on the power of truth, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for us fortunate disciples. So I haven't heard yet any kind of recognition of the tulku, but other than the fact that His Holiness, as we mentioned before, has said it has been reborn. So then finally, to all of our primordial teachers, our current and teachers that we've had from beginning this time, you who were my eyes for viewing all the infinite scriptures, you allowed me to see them, read them, understand them. Supreme gateways for the fortunate ones traveling to liberation. Engaging skillfully, moved by mercy, illuminating spiritual friends, I make this request. The implication is to please live long and stable lives. Okay, so yeah, a lot going on in the world. I hope everyone is well. I look forward to seeing some of you on Monday and certainly next Saturday. Maybe we'll have some more. Maybe David and Karen will be back from Magaland in Ohio, and Stephen will be recovered, and Snehi will have finished some of her duties at Shantideva Center. We'll have a few more people. So thank you. Look forward to seeing you. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Venerable
Venerable
George.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.